As a poet, I want to investigate all sorts of different things. And one of the things that came over me a couple years ago, I picked up a book by a philosopher. Most philosophers are not poets. They can be excellent writers, and they know that. Because they don't deal with imagery, they deal with ideas. And there's a big difference. An image is like a dream. It comes up from the inside of us. And as a poet, I practice. My exercises are practicing to bring up those images so that I can paint the pictures, then express that picture. I was reading a book by the philosopher Paul Woodruff. That book was called Reverence, Renewing a Forgotten Virtue. So, as a poet, I'm thinking, okay, what kind of imagery would I use to express reverence? The virtue reverence. And then I thought, okay, wait a minute. What imagery expresses justice? What image expresses courage? Virtue, as I personally found, may not be true for you, but what I've found is virtues are a little deeper than emotions. For instance, courage. Courage is not fearlessness. With courage, you have to make a choice of some sort. And you make a choice despite the emotions. Courage is a choice in the face of fear, in the midst of fear, the midst of shame. There's something deep inside of us that decides something, and it activates a virtue. The word virtue comes from the Latin virtus. It's a feminine word, but it means in Old Latin manliness. This is a men's conference, and I only found this out a few months ago. Virtue means manliness in the old way.
Is that related to the word virile?
It is.
V-I-R?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
How about veritas?
Veritas is V-E-R. That's truth.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
The virtue, the root of virtue is vir, V-I-R. Or as I was raised Catholic, so we pronounce the V as a V. The old Romans would say wir, which I always thought sounded silly, but I was corrected when I went to the university that I was the silly one. Virtues are the source of the feelings that prompt us to behave well. Virtues are the source of the feelings. They're not the feelings themselves. The virtue, we have to make a choice. And I used to use this on my students down in Red Wing. When you're in bed, in the dark, you can't see anything, but you know who you are. You have a sense of, this is me. I am a witness to myself. No matter how much turmoil is going on, there's a part of you that says, this is me. It may be frightened, it may be terrorized, it may be happy, but there is this sense of, this is who I am. When you fall asleep, the images that come through you are the dreams. You do not control the dreams. The dreams come through you. If you have dreams, if you have images that come through you before you have the emotions, before you have all these things, you can be a poet. You record your dreams regularly. You go back and read the recordings of those images as they come. And eventually you'll find out this is poetry. They may be harsh. They may be sweet. They may be loving. You will see the poetry that moves through you. So I want to get back. How do I get imagery to express virtue? Robert Bly used to say, okay, can you draw a picture of that poem? How many times has he said that to you or I? Can you draw a picture of that line? We don't want to stay in the abstract, in the idea. We want to move into the picture because there's some sort of resonance and energy that moves through that picture. Just as we talked about last night, you know, we have labels that are insufficient. Well, the same goes for other labels. Even labels for virtues are insufficient. And we get stuck in this Christianized or the old Greek, classical Greek language for virtue. And it doesn't work for me anymore. I saw these signs out here, responsibility way. Well, a sense of responsibility is a good thing, but I wanted to throw up. You know, this is a,
Yeah, maybe, you know, take care of your brother way. Something with a little bit more imagery in it.
Yep.
Could
Go
I just
ahead.
say something
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
that? There's something dead and deadening about abstract language.
Yep.
If the language is unmoored from its earthly references in things that we can sense and feel and touch and taste and see and hear, the poem and the language tend to float somewhere up here, but they never get really below this part of us. And what poetry is trying to do is activate the heart and the body physically through the use of sound, imagination, images. So that flatline language of consumer society is one of the great enemies of poetry and also of the soul life.
and I would say that abstraction starts to negate and erode virtue. It keeps us away from those depths. As a poet, I try to enliven my poems with imagery. And when I start going down with straightforward abstraction, I'm starting to get pretentious, pedantic. I wanted to study virtues after reading this book, and so I went out looking for poems about virtue. It's hard to find. However, I did find a poem by William Stafford. William Stafford writes poems with some of the greatest imagery. But let me read this to you. It's about the virtue of wisdom. It's entitled The Little Ways That Encourage Good Fortune by William Stafford. Wisdom is having things right in your life and knowing why. If you do not have things right in your life, you will be overwhelmed. You may be heroic, but you will not be wise. If you do have things right in your life, but you do not know why, you are just lucky. And you will not move in the little ways that encourage good fortune. The saddest of those not right in their lives, who are acting to make things right for others, they act only from the self. And that self will never be right. No luck, no help, no wisdom.
Harsh poem.
Now, I love this poem, and I love the teaching in this poem. And yet, this is all abstract language. What picture could be painted from that poem? There's no imagery in that poem. That could be written down from the minister and given to you at your confirmation.
Or you might imagine an old sage
Yeah,
sitting there in his robes,
exactly.
pronouncing the poem.
And there's great value in that. There's great value. But I'm a poet. I want imagery to help me get a feel for virtue. He talks about the virtue of wisdom in that. I want to give you a poem full of imagery that talks about virtue in a different way. And this is the poem, The Rights of Manhood, by the great Canadian poet Alden Nolan. Thomas edited a book for 90s Press, right?
Yeah.
A
yeah.
collection of his
I
poems.
think there might be a couple of copies downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
There goes Doug. Yeah?
I shouldn't have said that. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, you ain't heard nothing yet.
Yeah. So I want you to think about this as I go through the poem. You know, where's the virtue in this poem? The rights of manhood. It's snowing hard enough that the taxis aren't running. I'm walking home. My night work's finished. Long after midnight, with the whole city to myself. When I cross the street, I see a very young American sailor standing over a girl who's kneeling on the sidewalk and refuses to get up, although he's yelling at her to tell him where she lives so he can take her there before they both freeze. The pair of them are drunk, and my guess is he picked her up in a bar, and later they got separated from his buddies. And at first, it was great fun to play at being an old salt at Liberty in a port full of women with hinges on their heels. But by now, he wants only to find a solution to the infinitely complex problem of what to do about her before he falls into the hands of the police or the shore patrol. And what keeps this from being squalid is what's happening to him inside. If there were other sailors here, it would be possible for him to abandon her where she is and to joke about it later. But he's alone, and the guilt can't be divided into small, forgettable pieces. He's finding out what it means to be a man and how different it is from the way that only hours ago he imagined it. He made a choice, despite all this fear of getting caught by the shore patrol. There was a bit of compassion in him. He had to make that choice to stay there, to help get her out.